Hi, it's Ashley Black with Candid Consulting, here to address some of your common and not so common questions about Google App campaigns. In this video, we're going to talk about how to optimize your campaigns. A lot of people assume that because Google App Campaigns is an automated product, it will automatically optimize for the best performing creative assets. That's not always the case. So I'm going to talk you through how to identify which creatives are not performing great and what to do to better improve your campaigns. Let's get started. So before I get into everything, I just want to call out that campaign optimization is very unique to every account, to every campaign in some cases. And so, I'm going to be giving guidance in one example, but it's not necessarily a one size fits all. If you're not seeing the same things I'm seeing, or maybe you try something and it doesn't work, a lot of it is trial and error. But I did want to provide some insights if you're just getting started on how I would go about approaching campaign optimization for one specific campaign. So I'll get the timer out of the way here so we can see. One of the things that I start with is, I'm actually at the ad group level within a campaign, and you can see I've got 5 different ad groups. Real quick, I do want to call out that the target CPA that I have set for this campaign is $30. And then what I really want to come and see is like, okay, well, how are these ad groups delivering against that target? And you can actually see that there's a really wide, and there's also a wide range of cost associated. The thing that you want to pay attention to first is your time frame. So right now I have it set for the last 10 days. This in-app action that we're optimizing for is actually something that might take 2 days to convert. So I probably don't want to look at data right up to yesterday, and you'll notice that the numbers will likely change. You can kind of look at it here. This is for a start trial. I'm going to backdate it maybe to the 24th. Today's the 27th, so I'll go 16 to 24 just to make sure that I'm looking at data that's a little bit more fully mature. And you can see that some of the numbers changed. In particular, this one's catching my eye. This one ad group is delivering a CPA at $50. Keep in mind that the total cost for this ad group is a lot smaller relative to the 2 above it, right? I have this, I think, filtered for cost. So that's something to keep in mind. But let's actually dig into that one first, because it does seem to be, driving a really high CPA relative to my target. So if I go into this one, a lot of times people don't go into the asset level and make optimizations. I think that's not necessarily the wisest choice. I do like to make optimizations at the asset level. It's not so much that the assets aren't converting that well. It could be that the inventory that that particular asset is serving on isn't converting well. And as you may or may not know, you don't have many controls over where your assets serve for UAC. So sometimes even removing a poor performing asset isn't so much about, the text wasn't working or the image wasn't converting. It's that where it was showing or whatever inventory it was showing up on wasn't converting. And so it's just a function of getting that asset out so that we're not necessarily tapping into that inventory anymore, so that we can, make our campaigns perform better. So now I'm in here. Again, this is a fairly short range of time. I'm only looking at 8 days. I may, backdate this a little bit more so that I'm looking at, just over 3 weeks here. And then actually come through and see like, hey, what are the assets that are driving this cost up? You can see that I've already removed many of the assets that weren't performing well. A lot of these have been excluded. So I'm just going to filter for those that are enabled. But very quickly, you can see that, some of these assets are not, well, this one in particular is just performing very poorly. It's only had one in-app action. It hasn't had that many impressions, which is something I pay attention to as well. But one thing that I do like to compare is, okay, this one has spent $128. The one above it has spent $132. They're fairly comparable in terms of their spend. They're fairly comparable in terms of the number of impressions and therefore the CPM. But this one is converting so much better. As you can see, we've driven, 3 times as many in-app actions versus the 1 for this one. So this is a problem, right? This one is performing poorly, even though it hasn't received that many impressions. But I know that it could perform better because this one is. And so that's one that I would likely end up removing. So the next thing that I may pay attention to, again, there's a bunch of different things that I look into when I'm optimizing campaigns, but I pay a lot of attention to the network distribution, as I mentioned earlier. And what I mean by network distribution is when you come, again, I'm at the ad group level, I'm going to come in and segment, and I'm going to select network. And when I do that, I can actually see the spend and the CPA based on where that traffic came from. So Google search, which you should know if you're serving on Android or if this is an Android app, Google search includes searches on google.com, but also in the Play Store. There's AdMob inventory, but it also includes something called MGDN, Mobile Google Display Network, which can include mobile websites, can also include ads on Play Browse. So if you have a Google rep, they can actually show you all of this inventory breakdown a lot more granularly. But if you're just doing this on your own, this is basically the cut that you would see. YouTube is also included in here. This particular campaign is not serving anything on YouTube intentionally. But the thing that I wanted to walk through is you can see when you do that network cut that you will notice the spend by different network, but also you can start to see the cost per in-app action by network. So let's just call some things out, right? This one's spending pretty much 50-50 on both display and Google search, but you see a big difference in terms of the CPA between those two networks. Not surprising, typically Google search will have a cheaper CPA, but the CPMs, like the cost to actually buy that inventory, is a lot more expensive. You can see the CPM on search is $27 versus $7. If I could find my CPC, $136 versus 93 cents. So, there's a difference in the cost, but also the quality. So what do I do based on this information? Now that I know that there's this big disparity, that display is really driving up the CPA, I'm going to try and identify which assets might be driving a lot of that display traffic. So if I come in again at the asset level, you can do this breakdown again. This is not perfect. I'll get into reasons why, but I'm going to look around and see, hey, who's taking up all of that display spend? Like, who's really driving up the display spend here? Again, I have this filtered by cost. This one is mostly serving on search. It still has a very high CPA. We can address that in a second, but really where I want to see is, hey, who's got the big spend on display? And you can see here, this particular asset, this image asset, is serving a lot on the display network. And I'm trying to see if there's any other ones. Again, most of the image assets, that's not always the case. Sometimes you will see text assets that are serving heavily on display. So the next step that I would likely do, maybe not so much for this one as it's actually driving a decent CPA, is to clean up these ones here. So this one is really driving things up. And again, it's not so much that the asset is the problem, it's that the inventory in which that asset is serving on is causing the CPA to be high. So this is not necessarily a creative optimization, it's a placement optimization, if that makes sense. So my next step here would be to clean up this asset by removing it. And typically I like to always replace it with a different asset and not just, I don't want to just reduce without backfilling something else to serve and to test. So that's a really, really basic approach to campaign optimization. There's so much more that I could go into, but the intention of these videos is to be short and sweet. Hopefully this gives you a better understanding of how maybe I would approach something, and you can take these learnings and apply them to your campaigns as well. Good luck.